Reagan raised taxes. Okay, Reagan actually had a amnesty program for illegal immigrants. Neither of those things would allow Reagan to be nominated today. So, to what level can you truly emulate Ronald Reagan? Isn't that from a period of time when he was willing to work with Tip O'Neill across the aisle to get stuff done? Isn't that what people want more than anything else, is not just principles, but action?
He is considered by many to be the turning point president in our modern era. And there's no doubt Ronald Reagan did a number of positive things for America. But the critics will tell you he wasn't perfect. No one is, of course. And he was not as nearly as far right as many of the current presidential candidates and those who invoke his name as a rallying cry. Reagan preached bipartisanship in many cases. And some current POTUS hopefuls are beginning to wear on people with cries that they are the new Reagan. And a number of people are not impressed. Best answer the questions in with the New York Times bestselling author of Last Act, The Final Years and Emerging Legacy of Ronald Reagan. Welcome Craig Shirley back to the Hardline. All right, Craig, let's get right to it. Is this rush to be more like Reagan just getting simply out of hand?
Yes and no. If they understand Reagan properly, then no. If they don't, then yes. Is that, you know, there's a great mythology that's grown up about he and Tip O'Neill being great friends. As a matter of fact, they weren't great friends. Reagan was very cautious and very chary about his dealings with Tip O'Neill. And Tip O'Neill had nothing but contempt for Ronald Reagan. He said so in his biography, Man of the House. He said wrote a lot of awful things. They really only worked together twice, once on the Tepper deal in 1982 and another on Social Security. And even on Tepper, Reagan really never trusted O'Neill again after that because, as you recall, in 1982, Reagan agreed to $1 in tax increases for every $3 in tax cuts, in spending cuts. He got the tax increases, but the spending cuts never came. And O'Neill kind of chortled about to his colleagues that they pulled the wool over Reagan's eyes. Reagan realized he'd been duped and never engaged in that type of deal again with Tip O'Neill. Ronald Reagan was a conservative, there's no doubt about it. But foremost in his mind was the Soviet Union. And so everything that Reagan did in his 8 years as president must be judged in the shadow of the Cold War, including the so-called amnesty deal, which really wasn't amnesty. Don't forget, a lot of those people were escaping communist tyranny in Cuba and Nicaragua and other countries.
Let me bring it back, if you can, Craig, for just a moment here. I only got about a minute and a half left here, but I want to bring it back to this. You're right about all of this, but when you talk about understanding Reagan properly, many people now who are voters, 18 to 20s, the 20-somethings, the 30-somethings, they don't know who Ronald Reagan is. So is it a winning strategy for someone on any side, but specifically the GOP side, to evoke Ronald Reagan constantly as the reason why they should be president?
Well, you know, that's a good question. I think, you know, on one hand, no, you'd say as a political strategist said no, because he's only known by older voters now. On the other hand, it's mostly older voters who vote now and who have fond memories of Ronald Reagan. On the other hand, too, is that it is important to educate. You know, political campaigns should be an education process about American history and about American public policy. And that it's good that they're talking about Ronald Reagan because it is instructive to younger voters to understand how American conservative works. So I can say, yes, as long as you put it in the context of the present and the future, and Reagan would have always said, is that, you know, he don't vote for me, vote for my philosophy.
30 seconds here. Ted Cruz is the guy who says he is more like Ronald Reagan than anybody here, but he has no colleagues in the Senate that like him, no endorsements of fellow senators. 30 seconds to you. Is he the most Reagan-like candidate?
I see bits of Reagan, Ed, in all the candidates. You know, in his penchant for spending cuts in Kasich, in his belief in the future and in Donald Trump, in his belief in the Constitution, in Ted Cruz. So I see the only candidate I don't see any part of Reagan in is ironically is a fellow named Bush, but that's because he is a Bush. So, but yeah, so Reaganism continues to live inside the candidates and inside the Republican Party.
And we'll see who gets it most as they continue to talk about this. Craig Shirley, always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you next week. Rock on, true believers. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow night, right back here on The Hardline.